The Science Basement!
Hello and welcome to the Science Basement podcast, a podcast for those who love all things science. I'm your host for today, Roselydiah, and joining me today as a co-host is Rhiannon.
Hello!
Today we are joined by Dr. Dollwin Matharu, a postdoctoral researcher specializing in the infant's gut microbiome. She will be sharing insights from her PhD research on human milk oligosaccharides. Dollwin, welcome to the Science Basement podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you both? And thanks for having me on the podcast, by the way. Really excited to be here today and looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I'm good. It's a bit nice sunny day today.
So let's get started by getting to know you first. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your academic journey?
So I graduated last year from University of Helsinki, where I got a PhD in infant microbiome, and now I continued as a postdoctoral researcher working on the same research theme, but this time focus on the gut-brain axis.
Right. Now you're in microbiome research. Was science always your passion?
Yes, I've always been interested in science. I remember as a child, I actually wanted to become an astronaut when I grew up.
Classic.
Yeah.
But the glamorous job, isn't it, the astronaut?
Right. But then later in high school, I became more inclined towards microbiology and biotechnology. And it was during my master's program, actually, where I became interested in microbiome. And then I decided to do a PhD in infant gut microbiome.
Very interesting. It's always nice to hear how people get into the fields they get in because, I think always as a kid you have some crazy science dream that you end up changing quite a lot. That's nice. I think when I was younger I wanted to study maths for some reason, which I'm very glad that I changed.
I wanted to be a social scientist.
That's quite different to what you do. Interesting. Going back to your area of microbiome research, what is the thing that excites you the most about microbiome research?
I think there are many things that excite me about this area, but it's just how interconnected it is to so many different health aspects. And it's very fascinating how this so tiny yet powerful world resides within all of us. And when we think of microbes, we usually think of bacteria, but they're actually helping us shape our metabolism, also helping us regulate our mood, and even skin health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, the microbiome itself and how I guess more recently it's become a positive thing, not just a negative. Like you say, bacteria is normally known as a negative thing, I would say, at least when you're growing up. It's like, oh, don't get the germs on you.
Definitely. And I think along those lines also it's very important to note how dynamic it is, right? So, many things in our environment, for example, can change it as well. Little things like just eating more fiber or incorporating daily exercises in our routine as well. Yeah,
it's interesting how these things can really affect the microbiome. Eating things makes sense when you think about it because that's where the bacteria is living in the gut and, it needs different foods to kind of work, I guess. But yeah, it's very important. So you mentioned, or we mentioned earlier that your PhD is in infant microbiome. What is the kind of difference in the infant microbiome versus the adult microbiome?
So, as you said, I did my PhD on infant gut microbiome. So, infant gut microbiome refers to all the microbes that reside in a baby's intestine or their gut. And they are bacteria, but also viruses, fungi, protozoa, and archaea as well. And microbiome in general refers to the communities of microbes that reside in various parts or on various parts of a body, such as skin.
So it's not only about the bacteria.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Because when somebody thinks about a microbiota, they only think bacteria.
Yeah, because even the archaea, all these different types of microorganisms, as we can say, and the fungi, I never had thought that this is included.
Yeah, especially in the gut. Of course, bacteria outnumber the other microbes. And I think that for that very reason, bacteria is also the most studied member of the gut microbiome.
Okay. So you just defined the infant gut microbiome. How is this different to the adult gut microbiome?
Right. So the adult gut microbiome is rather complex, whereas the infant microbiome is a much simpler ecosystem. And so when a baby is born, their microbiome is rather simple and not very diverse, and it becomes more complex over time. And it is also influenced by a lot of different factors, such as how they are fed, either if they are breastfed or if they're bottle fed, and also how they are born, vaginal versus C-section, and even antibiotic use in infancy, amongst other environmental factors.
So there's lots of different things that kind of shape the microbiome of the infant. You mentioned that as an infant, your microbiome is more simple. How does it become more complex? How are you exposed, or how does the different microbiome build up?
I think that's a very interesting question, and there are a lot of different factors that influence the complexity of the microbiome, or the infant microbiome for that matter. So one of the important factors that contribute to this diversity is introduction of solid foods, because when the baby feeds on breast milk, it's a rather homogeneous food source, right? So when they start eating solid foods, they're exposed to a lot of different kinds of solid foods. So that contributes to the increase in diversity. But there are also new reports that suggest that where you live can also influence the microbiome development. For example, if you're exposed to more green spaces versus if you are in an urban setting.
Okay, so it's really environmental.
I suppose like people who are in a more hygienic environment would have a different microbiota than people who are in like an environment which is not very hygienic, would say.
Okay, so from the infant to the adult, the microbiome develops and becomes more complex. Is there pros and cons to having kind of different exposures throughout your like infant life or as you become an adult?
Yeah, so studies so far suggest that for the first few months of life, it's better to have a simple community state or a much simpler microbiome in infants, and that's indicative of good microbiome health. But it also then needs to become more complex over time. So if it doesn't become complex at the right time, that could also be problematic. But also if it does become complex early on, that could also be problematic.
Okay. So basically it depends kind of what time as an infant you're exposed to additional things.
Yeah. But I think in general, as an infant grows, it's good to be exposed to, for example, the household microbes or microbes from other siblings, and also access to healthy green spaces. I think that all helps develop the infant's immunity, or that all contributes to positive development of the infant's immunity. Of course, if at that time an infection happens, then that can disrupt the microbiome as well. So I think in the microbiome field, we often tend to discuss a lot on what are the correct exposures at correct time, because all of that also dictates not just the microbiome, but also the immune health later in life as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can imagine that there's many different factors as you're researching, and like different kids are exposed to all sorts of different things. You can't really control for everything, so exactly. I can imagine that it's very hard to research, but also very different results and different things depending on a lot of different factors.
Right, and as you mentioned, it's so multifactorial that it's not possible to remove the effect of one variable and then study how the others would act in the absence or presence of that.
So then why is it so important to study about infant gut microbiota specifically?
It's very important to study the infant microbiome because early life, it's a very critical window for development. And as we spoke, microbiome is involved in a lot of different activities besides digestion. For infants, it's also responsible for training their immune system and long-term health outcomes as well. So I think understanding how the microbiome develops early on can help us find better ways to support the infant microbiome, but also health later as well.
Can I just ask one follow-up question quickly? How does the microbiome actually link to the immune system?
So there are certain microbes in the infant gut that help train baby's immune system in several different ways. For example, some bacteria can interact with certain immune cells in the gut. And there are also other ways that researchers are studying right now. So I think we need to keep our eyes out for what interesting studies might be coming in the future.
So in addition to the infant microbiome, your PhD was about human breast milk. Tell us about the importance of human breast milk.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. So as you mentioned, my PhD focused on microbiome, but also breast milk, and we studied its role in shaping infant microbiome. And breast milk is incredibly important because it not only provides nutrition for the baby, but also helps build a strong foundation for a healthy microbiome. And I think what makes breast milk so fascinating is its incredible complexity. It is not one size fits all, and it is tailored to the baby's needs, and it changes over time. For example, it changes throughout lactation, right? So also there is very interesting emerging evidence that breast milk enhances its immune supporting or immune modulating properties, for example, when the baby is sick.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
So there are still reports coming out on that. So it would be interesting to see what the studies in future suggest. But so far, the emerging studies suggest that when the baby falls sick, the mother's milk would produce certain antibodies and other immune boosting properties that would help the child recover faster.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think I saw some video on like Instagram or something. You know, Instagram can sometimes be very informative about this when mothers use this guard on the nipple to stop for the biting. You know, when the babies are teething.
Okay.
But they were saying, it was some nurse saying like, actually this can be, you shouldn't use it all the time because it stops the saliva of the baby
from communicating
to the mother or the nipple or something. I don't know if there's any scientific research, but it was a nurse saying it, so I assume maybe it's based on something. But yeah, it's something I never even realised that the baby, because I guess is it in this sense that you say that the mother's milk can produce antibodies, so for the baby sickness, is it?
So I'm not sure if we know the mechanisms right now because this is not the main area of my research, but I have come across studies which suggest that there is some kind of communication happening between the baby and the mother. So when the baby is sick, the mother's milk would increase the amounts of antibodies and other immune boosting properties that the milk has, so that it could potentially help.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it makes sense if it's through the baby's spit or, you know, like something in their mouth.
I think definitely that also could play an important role. So there's microbiome, there's oral microbiome, right? So there's microbiome in baby's mouth, but there's also breast milk microbiome, and also there is community of microbes on the mother's skin. All of these might interact with each other. But I think also what's important and also interesting is that now we see that there is more research happening on topics like breast milk or even vaginal microbiome, because these topics are related to women, and we know that even till date, like a lot of funding goes towards conventional research and less funding goes towards research related to women health. So probably that's one of the reasons we don't know that much so far.
Yeah, it's a very strong, involving field, I guess, because of this. Yeah,
and I think this is also a bit of a taboo topic, right? Like breastfeeding or breast milk. We don't tend to discuss this so openly as well. But I'm really happy to see the newer studies, and also I think social media is doing a great job, talking about all of these as well.
Yeah, I think it's important, like you say, it's a taboo topic, even to breastfeed. People don't really talk about it, and I guess it's something that most people who have had a baby will potentially breastfeed, so it's kind of like this acceptance, but not necessarily knowing about what it is or the kind of science behind it. As you say, it's not being researched because it's just people breastfeed and they stop breastfeeding.
Right. I would say especially in the past decade there are a lot of new studies coming out on breast milk, but also different components in breast milk, right? So I think we are headed in the right direction.
So what specifically were you studying about the human breast milk?
So in my PhD project, I looked at human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs, which are these unique indigestible sugars found in breast milk, and they are known to affect the infant microbiome and overall health as well.
So, why did you choose to study HMOs?
So breast milk contains a lot of different components like lactose, fats, proteins as well. But it is really HMOs that set human milk apart from other milks. So these sugar make up the third most abundant part of the breast milk. And although we can't digest them ourselves, our gut microbiome can. Or HMOs provide important health benefits for the baby through the gut microbiome.
Okay, so the gut microbiome is part of the baby, but like this, the human cells themselves aren't using
Our
the
bodies
HMOs.
lack the enzymes to break down these HMOs, but our bacteria has, or maybe the other members of the microbiome also possess enzymes. But we know so far that there are certain members of baby's gut microbiome that do have the enzymes to break down these HMOs or these indigestible sugars into simpler components.
So you mentioned that, I mean, in the name, I guess it says the answer, but the human milk oligosaccharides, is it only found in humans, these HMOs, or?
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
HMOs or human milk oligosaccharides, as the name suggests, are present only in human breast milk. There are similar structures or similar molecules found in animal milk as well. For example, we know there are BMOs or bovine milk oligosaccharides.
So in the cows, yeah.
Exactly. But they are structurally different and they also have slightly different functions. So HMOs are suited to babies' needs, whereas the BMOs and the other milk oligosaccharides and other animal milk, they're suited to the growing needs of those animals.
So the HMOs are just the food for the microbes.
Yes, I think that would be a great way to put it simply, that lactose, lipids, other proteins, other components in milk is food for the babies. But HMOs are actually food for the gut microbiome or certain members of the gut microbiome that can digest them. And also those bacteria that can digest HMOs are often linked to positive health benefits.
Okay, interesting. So, because, I guess if you think of like, kind of going back to the beginning when we were talking about the adult microbiome or the infant as it gets older, at this point the baby's only eating or drinking, consuming the breast milk. So it's important that here also the gut microbiome is also has some, so we can say food to help it function. Whereas I guess when the infant gets older, the solid food will also help fuel the gut microbiome.
Yeah. Also, what's really interesting, and it's there's emerging body of evidence in our field that there are several microbes or several bacteria that can digest these indigestible sugars, and we see that oftentimes in the very early infancy, for example, up till the age of 6 months, there are these bacteria that can only act on HMOs. But then when the solid food is introduced, the baby is usually still breastfed until some amount of time. So then there are other microbes that assume dominance in the gut that can act on both HMOs as well as fibers in other solid foods. So I think it's really elegant on how the microbiome undergoes this dynamic transition to support the changing nutritional needs of the baby.
Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. So just to clarify, the gut is digesting these HMOs, where the baby's body can't, or the baby's cells can't. Is any of the byproducts from this digestion of the HMOs used for the baby, or is it only used in the microbiome?
So the byproducts, as you mentioned, are useful for the baby as well. And also something I probably forgot to mention, that although these HMOs can only be broken down by the gut bacteria or certain members of the gut bacteria, there is emerging body of evidence again suggesting that they still might have some structural benefits or interact with certain cells in the gut, where they don't need to be broken down necessarily, but just by interacting with those cells, they can extend those benefits. And now coming back to your original question, yes. So indeed, these bacteria help break down HMOs into simpler compounds or simpler molecules that either can be directly beneficial for the baby, but also sometimes serve as molecules that are then fed on by other beneficial bacteria. So it's, as we say, it's cross-feeding in scientific terms. They also help with increasing the amounts of other good bacteria in the gut.
Yeah. Okay.
So besides the HMOs being food for the gut microbiota of the infant, what other benefits does the infant get from these HMOs?
Because certain bacteria in the gut help digest these HMOs. The HMOs help babies grow those bacteria, which are related to or positively related to babies' health. And there is evidence now that these HMOs might also help support brain development. So yes, HMOs do play a big role in keeping babies healthy.
And are there different types of HMOs?
Yes, so there are more than 150 types of HMOs found in breast milk, and there might be even more which we haven't discovered yet, but structurally we can classify them into three broad categories. I won't go into the names of the three broad categories right now, but I just want you to imagine you have a Lego block structure and you can attach different Lego blocks to your main structure, right? And how you would get different types of structures. So there are studies that suggest that one type of structure of these HMOs might help prevent harmful bacteria from sticking to baby's gut, while others might be linked to baby's cognitive development and supporting brain health, and the others might be linked to baby's immune development. So yes, there is a lot of structure-function relationships in these HMOs, and we are still scratching the surface in terms of unraveling that.
Okay, so there's like a main structure, and then these, as you mentioned, the Lego blocks is a nice analogy to visualize. Then these kind of different additional blocks are added to make the different sugars.
Right.
Okay. And do all mothers produce HMOs?
So yes, while all mothers might not have all of these 150 or over 150 types of HMOs, all mothers do have these three broad categories of HMOs, but the variation within those categories or the levels of those HMOs really come from different factors which we don't know yet. And we know some factors, but there are other factors that we don't know yet.
What factors are these that affect the HMOs the mothers produce?
So far, we know that one of the major factors is genetics, of course, and also stage of breastfeeding, because the HMO levels also change throughout the stage of breastfeeding. They are higher in the milk produced in the very early stages, and they gradually deplete in the later stages in mature milk, for example.
Okay, so now we know about all about HMOs. Could you tell us about how you studied these HMOs in your PhD?
So in my study, I looked at the HMOs and how they were related to infants' gut microbiome and their health as well. We studied 350 moms and their babies, and we also collected a lot of data on their genetics as well as other environmental exposures.
That 350 is a lot of women. That's quite a big cohort size. What did you do with the samples after you had collected them?
Yeah. Well, you were so right that 350 is a large number, and I think that
I hope it wasn't just you doing all the results.
No, actually, I did. I remember, because a part of this research was done in Denmark in collaboration with a company there. So I remember processing those 350 samples. Was a lot, and especially, before my flight to Denmark, I was working for 3 days straight to process all these 350 samples. But I think it was worth it in the end, because our study is one of the largest studies of its kind, considering the number of samples, but also the amount of microbiome data that we have, and also background data on exposures and genetics as well.
Yeah, so it's really kind of this complete picture of not just the microbiome or not just the HMOs within the milk, but also other things about the mother, which
Right.
maybe you wouldn't, other studies maybe haven't
Right.
collected or haven't thought of if you're just studying just the HMOs, but sounds very
Yeah.
valuable.
I think we tried to get it as complete as we
Mhm.
could. Of course,
Yeah,
there are a lot
of
of
course.
factors which we couldn't.
Yeah.
So really, that was a really big study. So are all these 350 mothers from Finland?
Yes. So this study is based on the larger Helmi cohort, and the larger Helmi cohort comprises over 1,000 families, and they are all based in the capital region in Finland.
Okay, right. So what were the most significant findings regarding your study on HMOs?
We found that out of the 350 mothers that we looked at, each had a really unique HMO profile. While the types of HMOs were generally shared, the actual levels varied from mother to mother, just showing how very individual the HMO profiles are.
What else did you find?
We also found that there were some interesting differences in the HMO levels in these mothers related to season.
So that means like in winter was different from summer and spring.
So in our study, we noticed that the HMO levels varied seasonally. And it's important to note that when we talk of season, it's the season of milk collection, which was 3 months after childbirth. So we observed that the total amounts or the sum total of the HMOs were highest in milk collected in autumn and lowest in spring.
Okay, so what caused these differences?
So this kind of seasonal variation in HMOs is a newly reported phenomenon. So we know there are a few other studies that have reported this as well, but it's still fairly a new finding, and we feel it could be related to seasonal variations, for example, the length of the day or exposure to daylight, or even the changes in diet across season, because it's already been proven that in Finland at least there are major differences in diet by season.
I think because in summer we have a lot of fruits and in winter we have less fruits. Do you think?
Also, I think one of my colleagues spoke about this pollen allergy, which I'm not so sure of how that plays out with season, but I guess there's also a seasonal component there as well.
So was it that in autumn the HMO levels varied, but was it that they were higher or lower than in the other seasons?
Yes, so in our study, the HMO levels were the highest in autumn
Okay,
and
interesting.
lowest in spring.
Okay.
Do HMOs affect the microbiome composition?
Yes, many studies have shown that HMOs do affect the microbiome composition. However, in our study, we did not find super strong relationships between the HMOs and the microbiome. And more interestingly, in our study, the differences between the HMOs and mother's milk did not translate to positive or negative health outcomes in the child later on as well, up to the age of 2 years.
Interesting. So does that mean then that formula babies will develop similarly to breastfed babies?
Well, outside our study, there are several other studies that show super strong connections or significant connections between HMOs and microbiome, but these studies are often looking at smaller groups. In our study, as I mentioned, we did see certain patterns between HMOs and microbiome, but we did not find super strong connections. So coming back to your question, we feel while the differences in HMOs don't seem to strongly link to the microbiome composition in our study, it does not mean that the formula-fed babies develop in the same way as the breastfed babies, because it's the presence of HMOs in breast milk more than the individual variations in their types or amounts that could play a key role.
So just to clarify, the formula milk, do these have HMOs in it in the milk itself?
There are certain new brands of these formula that have HMOs added, and also there's a lot of studies going on from the companies that manufacture these formula with HMO on if it's good to add certain number of HMOs, or is it better to make it a blend? So that research is still going on. But quickly coming back to your last point on if the breastfed babies develop in the same way as formula-fed babies, I think it's also important to note that there are several other components in breast milk besides HMOs. For example, lysozyme, antibodies, and other factors which are present in breast milk, but formula doesn't have
Okay, so it's actually kind of, formula is actually lacking quite a bit that the mother's breast milk has. Okay. Yeah, so there's many things in the formula that's missing, but also with the HMOs, I guess, like you said, with the blend or without the blend, as you found in your study, that the quantity of HMOs is very unique and can be very different from mother to mother. I guess, obviously, when the companies are making a formula, they're not making it like personalized to the mum. So I guess this can also have some effect.
It is possible, because even as scientists, it's very difficult to study what different factors affect the composition of breast milk. So it's, I think, even more difficult to manufacture formula fortified not just with HMOs but other unique components of breast milk, personalized to each and every mom out there.
So can we have just HMOs in the market so that we can just go and buy HMOs?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as I mentioned, the good news is that there are companies out there that are already working towards adding HMOs in formula. And, you know, some of them are working to develop even better solutions. I think the formula companies do really have a lot of potential, but also real responsibility to base their work off of solid, data-driven and ethical research.
Yeah, because my follow-up question is going to be like, as you mentioned, the many women or any kind of mother or father, for example, you might not have access to the breast milk. So it's can be very varying reasons for this. So I think it's very important for the formula to be, you know, as nourishing as the breast milk could be for cases where people just simply cannot breastfeed. So is there any kind of the baby or the infant, would it have like a lower immunity or anything like that if it is using the formula compared to the breast milk?
I think it's important to breastfeed when breast milk is available. That is definitely should be the first choice if possible, because WHO, or the World Health Organization, recommends exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life at least, and continued later as well if possible. And indeed, breast milk is the gold standard for infant nutrition. But as you said, and I completely agree, that in cases, you know, breast milk is not available, I think adding HMOs to infant formula is definitely an important step forward. And yeah, we haven't been able to replicate the incredible complexity of breast milk yet, but I think we're seeing the progress in terms of bringing formula a little closer to breast milk, and I'm really interested in seeing what comes next in the market.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it's very important for people to know the differences, because, you know, when you're not a scientist, you see the formula, maybe you have the option to breastfeed and you decide not to because it's just, I mean, I don't have any children, but I can imagine it's very much easier not to breastfeed. But if you don't know the importance, then you wouldn't know. So I think it's very important for people to hear, and also, even if they are in the cases where they have to buy the formula, to be also knowledgeable as to which formula maybe is the best, or to know the pros and cons of different formulas like you just mentioned. So following up on the immunity side of things for the infant, although the formula can have different components, does this affect the immunity at all compared to the human breast milk?
So yes, it's possible that not having access to components in the breast milk, including HMOs, could affect infant immunity. But it's also important to note that baby's own immune system is also rapidly developing in the first year of life. And over time, they could build immunity through correct exposure from the environment and also vaccinations. So it's possible that even in the absence of HMOs or other components in breast milk, it's still possible to build that immunity over time. But in cases breast milk is available, it's better to go for it because it is just so unique, and also the World Health Organization recommends it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this really, I think this is a really important note for the people who can't have access to breastfeed, not to worry too much about missing out.
Right. And I think it's important when we talk of these things that we take into account pros and cons and different narratives and different perspectives, because as scientists, of course, our aim is to communicate our findings, but also not vilify mothers or a certain group that can't breastfeed. So it's important to know different sides of the story as well.
Absolutely. I think earlier we were talking about in the cases where you have options to choose, then choose the breast milk. But if you don't have, then you might not completely suffer. I mean, the child will not completely suffer. So I think now we can conclude, but what lessons do you think your study gives to the larger community?
I think our study emphasizes on the importance of breast milk and breastfeeding and HMOs as well, of course. Right. And it opens up discussion on the complex relationship between HMOs and microbiome and the overall health of the child as well. And it does encourage future researchers to explore and study the understudied factors as well.
Right. Now that you've mentioned about the future researchers, what would you hope to see future studies in this area?
So as I was just mentioning the understudied factors, right? So I think it would be really interesting to see future researchers digging into these emerging factors like how season could affect HMOs and whether this holds true across different geographies as well.
Okay, so the final thing that we do at the end of every episode. So Dollwin, today, what would your take-home message be, and what is this key message that you'd like to leave our audience with?
So as I spoke for the most part about breastfeeding and breast milk, I think my take-home message would be along those lines. So I would just say that the more we learn about breast milk, the more we realize that it's not just food. It's a complete health-boosting package with many components and complexities we are still unraveling.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Thank you. Very nice. That's a really nice take-home message. So that's all we had time for today. Thank you so much, Dollwin, for taking the time to join us at the Science Basement podcast. It has really been an interesting session. We have learned a lot. And I hope you enjoyed also your chat with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
As a reminder, keep looking for our new episode on the podcasting platform of your choice. I've been your host, Rose.
And I've been Rhiannon.
And this was the Science Basement podcast. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
The Science Basement!